This is 9B, and I'm going to cover the Minoan culture here in some detail. So, the Minoan culture, what are we looking at? Well, they're centered mostly on the island of Crete. It is primarily an agrarian society. They have agriculture. Now, if you remember the Aegean, you had a lot of islands, so you might think, but the island of Crete is a large island, relatively speaking, capable of supporting commercial grade agriculture. Now, they had a lot of trade, of course, and appeared to have no natural enemies. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, when you do some archaeological digging around a particular location, right, for whatever culture, you're looking around and you will find certain things. And among those things in antiquity is fortification walls, defensive walls, to help protect yourself if somebody's attacking you. Oftentimes there is an entry gate. In other words, sort of the only area that anybody who comes in to town that has any business being in town can enter through. Okay, and it controls who can get in and when and where. And that theoretically is also a gate that can be closed. So if they are attacked, it would be more difficult for people who are attacking them to get in. Okay, so when we look at the Minoan structures, we don't find not even a few, we find no fortifications of any sort. About a decade ago, they thought they found, look, I think this is a defensive wall. It ended up being some sort of terrorist agricultural thing, just to kind of hold back a hill from collapsing. So yeah, it's very curious, and also weaponry. And again, there were some weapons that were found, or some evidence of them. And okay, so they had weapons. No, because those weapons they found were theatrical props. Like how you see on plays, they use those wooden swords, right? And with cardboard shields. Okay, well, whatever it was they were made out of, they may have been made out of some leather or light grade metal, but it was not for real combat. It was for show. So while the Minoan culture probably had shows and stories about war heroes, they didn't appear to actually actively engage in warfare. Everybody is potentially a trade partner, and so you don't want to have enemies. They are an egalitarian society, from what we can tell, meaning that the genders were handled relatively equally. Okay, they would have a queen ruler as often as they would have a king. So it was just very progressive in that regard. Their religion tend to focus on nature worship, earth goddess, snake goddess, mountain goddess, that sort of thing. And they had temples that had the feature of plumbing. Okay, now it's not like the plumbing that we have today with valves and pipes. It probably was something very open air, but nonetheless, it's a very progressive sort of thing to have, where you have flushing toilets basically and other things like that. Not siphonic ones, although we do think they did have siphonic in some areas of the Indus Valley. If you look behind your toilet, you'll see that siphon action design in place. Well, okay, so the temples were also used not just as temples, but when they weren't using it for religious situations, they were using them for trade fairs or other events. Now, we do see that sort of today. There are a number of churches that will allow people to use their sanctuary for concerts or some other events, but generally not business, okay? And I'm talking about here the primarily Christian churches. And the basis for that tends to be Jesus getting mad at the merchants in the temple and kicking them out. That's our takeaway from that. But actually, Jesus, being the pedant about rabbinic law that he was actually kind of upset that the money that he saw being traded in the synagogue, it had not been washed. You see, you can't have dirty coins, dirty money in a temple, okay? It has to be washed and cleaned. It's a rabbinic law, and also good health measure, I suppose. And that's really kind of what it was that Jesus got angry about. They were not following the law. Now, there's question about, by dirty money, is that literally or figuratively, shady dealings? Well, we don't know. That's a theology subject. But nonetheless, in antiquity times, you have this big building, you use it as a temple, and when you're not using it as a temple, you use it for anything, even merchants selling their goods. Okay, so we see that their art tend to focus on nature scenery. Okay, it's not like the Assyrian art or other things. It's mostly nature themes is what we see present. Okay, so the island of Crete down here, it's the largest of the islands. We see that agriculture tended to thrive in the bigger places like Rhodes, Naxos, Kythera, a few other areas. The Cycladic culture was centered on the islands just north of Crete. So what we think happened was the Cycladic culture and the Minoans kind of melded together. The Minoans became more influential, and they somewhat controlled this area in as much as they cared to control it for their own business purposes. The Palace of Knosis can be seen over here. Look what it is surrounded by today, by farmland, as it was thousands of years ago. So not much has changed. And the primary crops would be olives. So you've got olive trees. You'd have a few other things, grapes and dates and whatnot. Now think about these crops, like an olive. What can you do with an olive? Well, you can eat it. You can eat it green. You can eat it ripe when it's black. You can squish the olive and have olive paste, eat it that way. Squish it more and you get olive oil. What can you use the oil for? Well, you can eat it. You can use it for your skin. You can use it as a mechanical lubricant. You can use it in a lamp because it burns, has a scent to it. So that's a lot of potential out of just one little product, the olive. And then grapes. Okay, what can you do with grapes? Well, you can eat the leaves. You can eat the grapes as grapes or dry them out. You got raisins. You can squish the grapes and get grape juice. You can let it ferment a little while and get wine. You can really let it ferment and you get vinegar. And you can really let it go extreme and get acid, which is a chemical that is useful for certain situations. So the grape, and the grape seeds, you can squish those grape seeds and make grapeseed oil. And as an oil, it could be used just like the olives as a mechanical lubricant, something you can burn or use on your skin or what have you, or even consume. So these products are very, very useful. And they're just a few of their products that they were able to produce. And we see that they had good agriculture because of their geography. It's a mountainous area, but in the lower areas where you have erosion taking minerals from the mountains down into the valley, you get a good natural fertilizer there. You see the mountains are just combing the atmosphere of moisture. So remember, you're in the middle of the sea, and there's a lot of humidity, moisture in that air, but when you get to the elevation of those mountains, then you'll get some precipitation. With all this extra agriculture, it became necessary for them to develop storage and shipping containers. And if you look at these containers, you can see they have tie downs so that they could be fastened down to a cart or the side of a mule, horse, or donkey, or into the bottom area, the hull of a ship. So you can ship them to customers who are far away. Okay, now they had a writing system. We call this writing system Linear A, and we don't know what it says. Okay, there's a lot of folks that have tried to decode it. We suspect a few things only because we've seen, for instance, this letter, which is either syllabary, I'm not sure which one, Ka, ka. We've seen that in linear B. And so we presume by context, it's probably the same here, but we don't know. We found jugs that have wine residue in them, and they have this symbol, so they must be wine containers. I think it's funny, we got 5.5 and 5, and no, do we have 6? Yeah, it's funny how they don't know some numbers and do know others. But anyway, this is a grand sum total of what we've been able to decipher. We don't know what language they were speaking, and if you don't know the language they were speaking, and you don't know what they're writing about, you kind of don't know how to decipher it, okay? So a lot of folks try, but we, all these centuries later, have not had any success with it. There's a famous Phiastos Disk. Do you start reading in the middle, go spiraling out, or do you start at the end? I'm not sure, but I assume the middle, but I don't know. Anyway, we see in the Palace of Knosis the bull horns. Remember, bull horns are a symbol of royal power. They look like a moon crescent, you know, up in the heavens. Right? So we see lots of bulls in this culture, very prominent. And the masonry, mixed masonry, tends to help sort of rattle off the seismic activity. Not entirely, but it does help to some extent. The artistic style seems to have influence from the Egyptians. It's not as colossal and grand as the Egyptians. It's very modest scale, very functional, very practical, this palace. Not a lot of, I must say, overt luxury. And you see here some columns like what you would see in Egyptian, except the Egyptians would be much bigger in their scale. So it's, yeah, very, very modest, very economical is another way of looking at it. The capital was sort of a business clearinghouse for all the trade. Here we see the Queen's chambers decorated with animals. Nature is the primary theme. We see dolphins, fish, and sea urchins present here. Here's the throne room with the hippogriffs, lilies. This, we believe, would have been covered in a gold leaf. There's some residue on there to suggest that this was gold covered. And pheasants. So yeah, that's what we find mostly in their artwork, is nature themes. There's an octopus, kind of late Minoan, I guess. And here we see, looks like a depiction, a map of an island here, structure. And we have these animals and these, you know, I said that they don't have war and fighting themes. And yet in that depiction, you see these two guys who, they clearly appear to be fighting each other, right? Well, yes and no. This, if you look carefully, you realize, oh, they got these special gloves on, outfits. These are pugilists or boxers. Now, this brings me to a very interesting quality about the Greeks in general. The second thing that is peculiar about them, their obsession with math being the first, that I mentioned in the previous video. Now, their obsession with competition. These folks were obsessed with competition. Now, things like the Olympic Games didn't formally exist, not to the level of organization that we would see later on. But, you know, what a not surprise that we find this Minoan culture very engaged in competitive events, okay? And then this culture later on develops what we know as the Olympic Games. And we all talk about the Olympic Games every 4 years. Why are they every 4 years? Because there's actually a competition every single year. They have the Pythian Games, the Isthmian, and the Nemean Games as well. So competition is a big deal in this culture. And it's not just the athletic events, okay? Bull jumping, I'll talk about that, you know, running marathons, wrestling. They had competitions for everything you could think of. They had poetry reading competitions, miniature bridge building competitions, debate competitions, to mention nothing about, say, artistic and of course athletic, very obviously. So that's very interesting that this culture would really be into that. And we see the Olympics comes from this culture as well. There is a little historic note I should mention here. You know, when we see the Olympics today, it's a very interesting sort of opportunity for us to demonstrate sportsmanship, mutual respect for others, right? For our competitors and where they come from. And back in the early Greek times, they had people travel from distances to come and compete to see who was the best. So we do that in our Olympic Games today, and we have this sportsman-like agreement. But kind of hate to blow it with some historical information here, but they weren't quite the sportsmen you might think they were. It wasn't like this. It was more like this, okay? What would happen is if you were, say, competing against somebody in whatever, wrestling, trumpet playing, whatever it was, before you even start the competition, first thing you do is you stare down your opponent and you start talking shit to him, okay? You question his parentage, what species his mother mated with, anything you can. It's a big slam fest back and forth, okay? And a very hurling of insults at each other. Not the gentleman's sport that you might think it was, okay? But that was kind of, part of what they did in these competitions, because they were very competitive with each other. And of course, they all knew that this was a game. I mean, you're doing this instead of going to war with your neighbors or another city or whatever. So it was a reasonable, healthy outlet of aggression for many folks. Okay, so yeah, bull jumping. Boy, they loved their bull jumping in the Minoan culture. They've depicted it on a lot of artwork. You can see what's going on here with this. So how it works is you got an athlete who's one end of the arena, very fit and trim, a bull who's been trained to kind of attack people. The bull comes charging at him, and bulls always attack the same way. Right when they get to you, they lower their head, and then their objective is to catapult you up in the air, okay, with their horns. And then you tumble around all discombobulated, plop on the ground, where am I? And at that point, the bull just sort of tramples you. So that's his game plan. But you're a human, you have a brain, you know what his game plan is, so you're counting on it. So as the bull is approaching you, and you see his head gets lower, right as he gets to you, he's gonna go up. Remember, the bull market and the stock market goes up, a bear attacks by going down, right? So bull attacks by going up. Okay, right before the bull lifts his horns, you grab the bull by the horns. And it's at this point where the bull then catapults you into the air. This is way better and more effective than a bungee cord, right? You do a double somersault, do a handspring off the bull's back. I'm sure the bull loved that. Half twist, stick your landing, yay. And there you go. Boy, they just loved this sport, their X Games. And the bulls, by the way, they're not the bulls that you see today. These are monster, leftover oryx from the Ice Age type animals. They were big, okay? Not like what you see in rodeos today. Yeah, so they depicted it a lot. They like their bull jumping, not a surprise. Bulls did also appear in the artwork in temples. Not a surprise. They admire this thing, royal power and other things. Also not a surprise is that it would appear in the context of fertility temples. We figure this looking at artwork that was found in conjunction with it. But here's the stumper, and that is, you look at this, and it's associated not just with fertility, but with female fertility. Now that's a poser right there. It's like, okay, I get it. how it would be male fertility. I mean, the thing's a male animal, right? It's got these hard, sticky up things. Okay, that works. But female fertility, how do you get that? Well, this had stumped folks for a while until it was 120 years ago. An amateur archaeologist who was also a doctor, he figured this out. Now, you'll figure it out too once I show you. I'm going to use something here. This is in no way meant to offend UT Austin here, but it's just that their symbol has a nice flat two-dimensionality quality to it. Now, I want you to look at this, and I want you to sort of look at it and think, what might this have to do with female fertility? Okay, I think you can see. Now, the interesting thing about this is what it suggests is that the Minoans had a precocious knowledge of the internal anatomy of humans. And we, in fact, have found a few, some evidence, a few remains of humans who had been clearly operated on, recovered, and lived sometime after that. So they seem to understand the human body on the inside pretty well. Okay, the snake goddess. Snake goddess, very important. Snake goddess represents regeneration from the earth, because snakes, they live in the ground, they come out of the earth. Presumably they communicate with the earth goddess, who tells them what's going on. And this is an important thing, because in this culture with all those earthquakes, you need to know when earthquakes are going to happen. And if you're going about your business and you see a bunch of snakes in the middle of the day, and they should be cooling off out of the sun in their burrows, and if they're out on the surface, you know something's up. Okay, this is a reasonably accurate way of predicting earthquakes. Now, in fact, the Minoan culture would come to an end because of a tsunami. That's an earthquake that happened far away, and people just in the middle, like 4 in the morning, just got decimated, not wiped out, but it was enough for them to not recover economically. And then we'll see the Mycenaean culture would dominate thereafter. But yeah, just paying attention to the snakes, because we're not sure what it is. Some animals are oblivious to earthquakes, others seem to sense it, and they freak out even days before an earthquake. Is it the quartzite being compressed, releasing these squeaky frequencies, or what? We don't know. But some animals just kind of weird out before an earthquake, and snakes are somewhat known to do that. So it's not a surprise that they would pay attention to snakes, because it might save your life in an earthquake-prone area. Okay, so again, their focus was on the earth oriented goddesses. Okay, so this is the end of the Minoan culture. This information can be found in your textbook, first edition, page 38 to 40, second edition, 42 to 46, and I think it's the same in the third edition. There's a couple questions, of course, back related to the Minoans here on page 47. We see that the Minoans wrote using the linear A. Once again, bulls are a symbol of royal power. Bull jumping, a very important sport. They lived on the island of Crete and other islands, but Crete was kind of the headquarters. An agrarian trade society with no enemies, and following earth goddesses, very egalitarian, equal gender treatment. Basic, simple plumbing for the infrastructure of their temples and their cities. Their art focused on nature worship, and they appear to know the inner workings of the human body. Okay, and we see competition, a basic staple of the Greek society. Okay, so this will end 9b, about the Minoan cultures, and we'll look at the Mycenaean 9c next.